Chapter 15. I woke with a start next to Jonas and Andrus. The door to our car had been closed and locked. People began to panic. The engines let out a hiss of steam. "Please don't move unless you absolutely have to," ordered Mrs. Gribus. "Make sure the bathroom area stays clear." "Mrs. Booklady, will you tell us a story?" asked the girl with the dolly. "Mama," whimpered a little voice, "I'm scared. Turn on the light." "Did anyone bring a lantern?" someone asked.
"Sure, and I have a 4-course meal in my pocket, too," said the bald man.
"Mr. Stallis," said Mother, "please, we're all doing the best we can."
"Girl," he commanded, "look out that little slot and tell us what you see."
I moved toward the front of the car and hoisted myself up. "The sun is beginning to rise," I said.
"Spare us the poetry," snapped the bald man. "What's happening out there?"
The train hissed again, then clanked. "NKVD officers are walking by the train with rifles," I said. "There are some men in dark suits looking at the train cars." We felt a jolt and the train began to move. "There's luggage everywhere," I said, "and lots of food on the platform." People groaned. The station looked eerie, desolate, frozen with only remnants of the chaos that had taken place. There were single shoes strewn about, a cane, a woman's purse lying open, and an orphaned teddy bear. "We're moving out of the station," I reported. I craned my neck to look ahead. "There are people," I said. "There's a priest. He's praying. A man is holding a large crucifix." The priest looked up, flung oil, and made the sign of the cross as our train rolled away. He was issuing last rites. Chapter 16. As we rolled, I reported every detail from the window. The ominous river, the big churches, buildings, the streets, even the trees we passed. People sobbed. Lithuania had never looked more beautiful. Flowers burst with color against the June landscape. We moved along. Our cars marked thieves and prostitutes. After 2 hours, the train began to slow. "We're coming into a station," I said.
"What does the sign say?" asked the bald man.
I waited for the train to move closer. "Vilnius. We're in Vilnius," I said quietly. Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. We had studied the history in school. 600 years ago, the Grand Duke Gediminas had a dream. He saw an iron wolf standing high upon a hill. He consulted a priest about the dream who told him that the iron wolf symbolized a large and formidable city, a city of opportunity. "Lina, may I speak to you, please?" The remainder of my classmates filed out of the room. I approached the teacher's desk. "Lina," she said, clasping her hands on the desk, "it seems you prefer socializing to studying." She opened a folder in front of her. My stomach leapt into my throat. Inside were notes I had written to girls in class, along with accompanying sketches. On top of the pile sat a drawing of a Greek nude and a portrait of my handsome history teacher. "I found these in the trash. I've spoken to your parents." My hands became clammy. "I was trying to copy the figure from a library book." She raised her hand to stop me. "In addition to being quite social, however, you appear to be a gifted artist. Your portraits are—" She paused, rotating the drawing. "Captivating. They show a depth of emotion well beyond your years." "Thank you," I breathed. "I believe your talent is above what we could develop here. There's a summer program, however, in Vilnius." "In Vilnius?" I asked. Vilnius was a few hours away. "Yes, in Vilnius. Next year, when you're 16, you'd be allowed to enter." If accepted, you'd study with some of the most talented artists in Northern Europe. Would that interest you? I tried to swallow my excitement long enough to speak. Yes, Mrs. Pronis, it would. Then I'd like to recommend you. You'll fill out an application and submit some samples of your drawings, she said, handing the folder with the notes and sketches to me. We'll send them off to Vilnius as soon as possible. Mrs. Pronis, thank you, I said. She smiled and leaned back in her chair. It's my pleasure, Lina. You have talent. You have a successful future ahead of you. Someone discovered a loose board behind some luggage on the back wall. Jonas crawled back and wiggled it aside. What do you see? There's a man in the trees, said Jonas. Partisans, said the bald man. They're trying to help us. Get his attention. Jonas stuck his hand out of the opening in the board, trying to wave. He's coming, said Jonas. Shh! They're unhooking the cars with the men, a man's voice said. They're splitting the train in two. He ran back into the woods. Intermittent shots rang out in the distance. Where are they taking the men? I asked. Maybe the men are going to Siberia, said Mrs. Rimis, and we're going somewhere else. I preferred the thought of Siberia if that's where Papa would be. Metal clanged and screeched. They were dividing the train. There was another sound. Listen, I said. The men. It grew louder. Louder. They were singing at the top of their lungs. Andrus joined, and then my brother and the gray-haired man. And finally, the bald man joined in, singing our national anthem, Lithuania, Land of Heroes. I wept. Chapter 17. The voices of the men in the other cars had sounded full of pride, full of confidence. Fathers, brothers, sons, husbands, where were they all going? And where were we going? A train car full of women, children, elderly and infirmed. I wiped my tears with my handkerchief and allowed others to do the same. When it was handed back to me, I paused, staring at it. Unlike paper, the handkerchief could travel hand to hand without deteriorating. I would use it to draw on for Papa. While I devised a plan, the women in the car showed constant concern for the baby, who could not seem to nurse. Mrs. Rimis urged Ona to keep trying. Come, dear. What is it? Asked my mother through the darkness of the car. It's Ona, said Mrs. Rimis. Her ducts are clogged and she's too dehydrated. The baby won't suckle. Despite Mrs. Rimis's efforts, nothing seemed to help. We rolled for days, stopping in the middle of nowhere. The NKVD wanted to ensure we could not be seen and had nowhere to run. We waited for our daily stops. It was the only time the door would be open to light or fresh air. 1 person, 2 buckets. Any dead bodies in there? The guards would ask. We had agreed to rotate. That way, everyone would get a chance to get out of the car. Today was my turn. I had dreamed of seeing blue sky and feeling the sun on my face. But earlier it had begun to rain. We had all scrambled to hold cups and containers out of the little slot to catch the rainwater. I snapped my umbrella closed, shaking the excess rainwater onto the sidewalk. A gentleman in a suit emerged from a restaurant, stepping quickly away from the drops I was splashing about. "Oh, sir, I'm sorry." "No trouble at all, miss," he said, nodding and touching the brim of his hat. The smell of roasted potatoes and spiced meat drifted out of the restaurant. The sun appeared, spreading a golden filter across the concrete and warming the back of my head. Wonderful! The concert in the park wouldn't be canceled tonight. Mother had planned to pack a hamper with our dinner for a moonlight picnic on the grass. As I rolled the umbrella and wrapped the closure, I jumped when I saw a face staring at me from the puddle at my feet. I laughed at my disorientation, smiling at myself in the pool of water. The edges of the puddle shimmered beneath the sun, creating a beautiful frame around my face. I wished I could photograph it to draw later. Suddenly, a faint shadow appeared behind my head in the puddle. I turned around. A pastel rainbow arched out of the clouds. The train slowed. "Hurry, Lina. Do you have the buckets?" asked Mother. "Yes." I moved closer to the door. Once the train stopped, I waited for the sound. Boots and clanking. The door jerked open. "One person, 2 buckets. Any dead bodies in there?" the NKVD commanded. I shook my head, eager to get out. The guard stepped aside and I jumped down. My stiff legs gave way and I fell to the muddy ground. "Lina, are you all right?" called Mother. "Davai!" yelled the guard along with a series of Russian expletives before he spit on me. I got up and looked down the length of the train. The sky was gray. Rain fell steadily. I heard a scream and saw the limp body of a child heaved out into the mud. A woman tried to jump out after the corpse. She was smashed in the face by the butt of a rifle. I saw another body thrown out. Death had begun to gather a crop. "Don't delay, Lina," said the gray-haired man from our car. "Be swift with the buckets." I felt as if I were dreaming with a high fever. My head seemed airy and my step unsteady. I nodded and looked up at our car. A group of heads stacked upon one another stared back at me. Dirt and filth clung to their faces. Andrus smoked a cigarette and looked off the other way. His face was still bruised. Urine streamed through the bottom of the train car. Ona's baby cried from inside. I saw the wet green field. "Come here," it beckoned. "Run." Maybe I should, I thought. "Do it, Lina." "What's wrong with her?" Voices began chattering from the train car. "Run, Lina." The buckets flew out of my hands. I saw Andrus limping away with them. I just stood there, looking at the field. "Lina, come back in, dear," pleaded Mother. I closed my eyes. Rain splashed against my skin and hair. I saw Papa's face peering down from the matchlit hole in his train car. "I'll know it's you, just like you know Munk." "Davai!" An NKVD officer hovered over me. His breath reeked of liquor. He grabbed my arms and threw me toward the train. Andrus returned with buckets of water and gray animal feed. "Hope you enjoyed your bath," he said. "What did you see out there, girl?" demanded the bald man. I saw the NKVD throwing dead bodies off the train into the mud. 2 children. People gasped. The door to our car slammed shut. "How old were the dead kids?" asked Jonas quietly. "I don't know. I only saw them from afar." Mother combed through my wet hair in the dark. "I wanted to run," I whispered to her. "I can understand that," said Mother. "You can?" "Lina, wanting to get away from this is perfectly understandable. But like your father said, we must all stay together. It's very important." "But how can they just decide that we're animals? They don't even know us," I said. "We know us," said Mother. "They're wrong, and don't ever allow them to convince you otherwise. Do you understand?" I nodded, but I knew some people had already been convinced. I saw them cowering in front of the guards, their faces hopeless. I wanted to draw them all. When I looked up at our train car, everyone looked sick, I said. "Well, we're not," said Mother. "We're not sick. We'll soon be back in our homes. When the rest of the world finds out what the Soviets are doing, they will put an end to all of this." Would they? Chapter 18. We weren't sick, but others were. Each day when the train stopped, we'd lean out of the car and try to count the number of bodies thrown. It grew every day. I noticed Jonas kept track of the children, making marks with a stone on the floorboard of the car. I looked at his marks and imagined drawing little heads atop each one. Hair, eyes, a nose, and mouth. People estimated our path traveled south. Whoever was posted at the little window would call out when we passed markers or signs. My feet were numb from the vibration of the floorboards. My head was curdled from the stench and I itched terribly. Lice were biting down the side of my hairline, behind my ears, and in my armpits. We had passed through Vilnius, Minsk, Orsha, Smolensk. I wrote the path of cities on my handkerchief in ink. Each day when the door was open to light, I would add more detail in identifying clues that Papa would recognize. Our birthdays, a drawing of a Vilkis, a wolf. I made markings only in the center, surrounded by a circle of hands touching fingers. I scrawled the words "pass along" under the drawing of the hands, and I drew a Lithuanian coin. When the handkerchief was folded, the writing was undetectable.
"Drawing,"
whispered the gray-haired man, winding his watch. I jumped.
"I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I won't tell."
"I have to get word to my father," I said, my voice low, "so he can find us. I figured I could pass this handkerchief and that eventually it will get to him."
"Very clever,"
he said. He had been kind on the journey. Could I trust him? I need to give it to someone who will understand the importance and pass it along.
"I can help you with that,"
he said. We had been rolling for 8 days when the train jerked hard and began to slow. Jonas was at the little window slot. "There's another train. We're coming up on a train going in the opposite direction. It stopped." Our train car dragged, bleeding off speed. "We're pulling up alongside it. There are men. The windows are open on their cars," said Jonas. "Men?" said Mother. She quickly made her way to the window, swapped places with Jonas, and yelled out in Russian. They replied. The energy in her voice lifted, and she began to speak quickly, pulling for breaths in between questions.
"For God's sake, woman," said the bald man, "stop your socializing and tell us what's going on. Who are they?"
"They're soldiers," reported Mother, elated. "They're going to the front. There is a war between Germany and the USSR. Germany has moved into Lithuania," she shouted. "Did you hear me? The Germans are in Lithuania." Morale soared. Andrus and Jonas shouted and whooped. Miss Grebus began to sing, "Take me back to my homeland." People hugged one another and cheered. Only Ona was quiet. Her baby was dead. Chapter 19. The train with the Russian soldiers rolled away. The doors were opened and Jonas jumped out with the buckets. I looked over to Ona. She was forcing the dead child toward her breast. "No," she said through gritted teeth, rocking back and forth. "No, no." Mother moved toward her. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry." "No!" Ona screamed, clutching her baby. Hot tears stung my parched eyes.
"What are you crying for?" complained the bald man. "You knew it was going to happen. What was the baby going to eat? Lice? You're all imbeciles. The thing is better off. When I die, if you're smart, you'll eat me if you all want to survive so badly." He prattled on, grating, infuriating. The words distorted. I heard only the timbre of his voice thumping in my ears. Blood pumped through my chest and rose up my neck. "Damn you!" Andrus screamed and lurched toward the bald man. "If you don't shut your mouth, old man, I'll tear out your tongue. I'll do it. I'll make the Soviets look kind." No one spoke or tried to stop Andrus. Not even Mother. I felt relief, as if the words had come from my own mouth. "You're concerned only with yourself," Andrus continued. When the Germans kick the Soviets out of Lithuania, we'll leave you here on the tracks so we don't have to put up with you anymore. Boy, you don't understand. The Germans aren't going to solve the problem. Hitler's going to create more, said the bald man. Those damn lists, he muttered. No one wants to hear from you, understand?
Ona, dear, said Mother, give me the baby.
Don't give her to them, begged Ona. Please.
We will not give her to the guards, I promise, said Mother. She examined the baby one last time, feeling for pulse or breath. We'll wrap her in something beautiful. Ona sobbed. I moved to the open door to get some air. Jonas returned with the buckets. Why are you crying? He asked, climbing up. I shook my head. What's wrong? He pressed. The baby's dead, said Andrus. Our baby? He asked softly. Andrus nodded. Jonas put down the buckets. He looked over toward Mother holding the bundle and then at me. He knelt down and took the small stone out of his pocket, making a mark on the floorboards next to the others. He paused for a few moments, motionless, and then began slamming the stone against the markings harder and harder. He beat the floorboards with such force that I thought he might break his hand. I moved toward him. Andrus stopped me. Let him do it, he said. I looked at him, uncertain. Better that he gets used to it, he said. Used to what? The feeling of uncontrolled anger? Or a sadness so deep like your very core has been hollowed out and fed back to you from a dirty bucket? I looked at Andrus, his face still warped with bruising. He saw me staring. Are you used to it? I asked. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He pulled a cigarette butt from his pocket and lit it. Yeah, he said, blowing a stream of smoke into the air. I'm used to it. People discussed the war and how the Germans might save us. For once, the bald man said nothing. I wondered if what he said about Hitler was true. Could we be trading Stalin's sickle for something worse? No one seemed to think so. Papa would know. He always knew those sorts of things, but he never discussed them with me. He discussed them with Mother. Sometimes at night I'd hear whispers and murmurs from their room. I knew that meant they were talking about the Soviets. I thought about Papa. Did he know about the war? Did he know we all had lice? Did he know we were huddled together with a dead baby? Did he know how much I missed him? I clutched the handkerchief in my pocket, thinking of Papa's smiling face. Hold still, I complained. I had an itch, said my father, grinning. You did not. You're just trying to make this difficult, I teased, trying to capture his bright blue eyes. I'm testing you. Real artists must be able to capture the moment, he said. But if you don't hold still, your eyes will be crooked, I said, shading in the side of his face with my pencil. They're crooked anyway, he said, crossing his eyes. I laughed. What do you hear from your cousin Joanna? He asked. Nothing lately. I sent her a drawing of that cottage in Nidda she liked last summer. I didn't even get a note back from her. Mother said she received it, but is busy with her studies. She is, said Papa. She hopes to be a doctor someday, you know. I knew. Joanna spoke often of medicine and her hopes of being a pediatrician. She was always interrupting my drawing to tell me about the tendons in my fingers or my joints. If I so much as sneezed, she would rattle off a list of infectious diseases that would have me in the grave by nightfall. Last summer, she had met a boy while we were on vacation in Nidda. I'd wait up every night to hear the details of their dates. As a 17-year-old, she had wisdom and experience, as well as an anatomy book that fascinated me. There, I said, finishing the drawing. What do you think? What's that? Asked my father, pointing to the paper. My signature.
Your signature? It's a scribble. No one will recognize it's your name.
I shrugged. You will, I said. Chapter 20. We traveled farther south and passed through the Ural Mountains. Miss Grebus explained that the Urals were the boundary between Europe and Asia. We had crossed into Asia, another continent. People said we were on course for southern Siberia or possibly even China or Mongolia. We tried for 3 days to sneak Ona's baby out, but the guard stood near whenever the doors were open. The smell of rotting flesh had become unbearable in the hot car. It made me retch. Ona finally agreed to drop the baby down the bathroom hole. She knelt over the opening, sobbing, holding the bundle.
For God's sake, moaned the bald man. Get rid of that thing, I can't breathe.
Be quiet, Mother yelled to the bald man.
I can't, whimpered Ona. She'll be crushed on the tracks.
Mother moved toward Ona. Before she reached her, Miss Grebus snapped the bundle from Ona and threw it down the hole. I gasped. Mrs. Rimis cried. There, said Miss Grebus. Done. It's always easier for someone unattached. She wiped her hands on her dress and adjusted her hair bun. Ona fell into Mother's arms. Jonas clung to Andrus, spending nearly every minute by his side. He seemed angry all the time and so distant from his usual sweetness. Andrus had taught him a few Russian slang words I heard the NKVD use. It made me furious. I knew I'd have to learn a bit of Russian eventually, but I hated the thought. One night, I saw the glow of a cigarette illuminate Jonas's face. When I complained to Mother, she told me to leave him be. Lina, every night I thank God he has Andrus, and you should too, she said. My stomach ate itself. Pangs of hunger came at relentless intervals. Although Mother made an effort to keep us on a schedule, I lost track of time and sometimes dozed off during the day. My eyelids were drooping when I heard it. How could you? Have you gone mad? A female voice shrieked throughout the train car. I sat up, squinting to make out what was going on. Miss Grebus hovered over Jonas and Andrus. I tried to make my way over. And Dickens nonetheless? How dare you? You are becoming the animals they treat us as. What's going on? I asked. Your brother and Andrus are smoking, she bellowed. My mother knows, I said. Books, she said, thrusting a hardcover in my face. We ran out of cigarettes, Jonas said softly, but Andrus had tobacco. Miss Grebus, said Mother, I'll handle it. The Soviets have arrested us because we are knowledgeable, learned people. To smoke pages of a book is just... What were you thinking? Miss Grebus asked. Where did you get this book? Dickens. I had the Pickwick papers in my suitcase. Grandma had given it to me the Christmas before she died. Jonas, you took my book! How could you? Lina, began Mother. I took your book, said Andrus. Blame me. I certainly do blame you, said Miss Grebus, corrupting this young boy. You should be ashamed. Mrs. Arvidas slept on the other side of the car, completely unaware of what had transpired. You're an idiot, I screamed at Andrus. I'll get you a new book, he said. No, you won't. It was a gift, I said. Jonas, Grandma gave me that book. I'm sorry, said Jonas, looking down at his chest. You should be, I yelled. Lina, it was my idea, said Andrus. It's not his fault. I waved him away. Why did boys have to be such idiots? Chapter 21. Weeks. I lost track of how long we had been traveling. I stopped watching for bodies to be hurled from the cars. Every time the train pulled away, we left a litter of corpses in our wake. What would people think if they saw them? Would someone bury them? Or would they believe they were really thieves and prostitutes? I felt as if I were riding a pendulum. Just as I would swing into the abyss of hopelessness, the pendulum would swing back with some small goodness. One day, for example, just past Omsk, we stopped in the countryside. There was a small kiosk. Mother bribed a guard to let her out of the car. She came running back, her entire skirt bowed full and heavy. She knelt down in the car and released her skirt. Candy, toffees, lollipops, black licorice, mountains of gumdrops and other treats spilled out onto the floor, unfolding like a rainbow in front of us. Bright colors everywhere, pink, yellow, green, red, and enough for everyone. The children squealed with delight and jumped up and down. I bit into a gumdrop. A burst of citrus exploded in my mouth. I laughed, and Jonas laughed with me. There were cigarettes, matches, and dark chocolate wafers for the adults. They didn't have bread or anything substantial, explained Mother as she divided the treasure amongst everyone. There were no newspapers. Children grabbed Mother's legs in glee, thanking her.
"Foolish woman! Why do you waste your money on us?" said the bald man.
"Because you are hungry and tired," Mother said, handing the man a cigarette. "And I know you would do the same for my children if they ever needed it."
"Bah!"
he scoffed and looked away. 2 days later, while on the bucket run, Andrus found an oval stone full of quartz and other minerals. Everyone passed it around, oohing and awing. Mrs. Arvidas joked and put it up to her finger as if it were a shimmering gemstone. "Didn't you know?" she said. "I'm a train car princess." We laughed. People smiled. I almost didn't recognize them. I looked over at Andrus. His face beamed with a grin that changed his appearance entirely. He was handsome when he smiled. Chapter 22. After 6 weeks and the 3rd day without food, the train stopped. They did not open the door. The bald man who had been charting our progress from the city markers called from the window slot. Guessed we were somewhere in the Altai region, just north of China. I tried to peek through the cracks in the wagon boards, but it was dark outside. We banged on the doors. No one came. I thought of the loaf of bread I had left on my windowsill, still warm and swollen from the oven. If only I could have a piece, just one small pinch. My stomach burned with hunger and my head throbbed. I missed drawing on real paper and longed for light to sketch properly. I was sick of being so close to people. I felt their sour breath all over me, elbows and knees constantly in my back. Sometimes I had the urge to start pushing people away from me, but it was no use. We were like matchsticks in a small box. Late morning came, and we heard clanking. The guards opened the door and said we would be getting out. Finally! My entire body trembled at the shock of daylight. I marked Altai on my handkerchief. "Lena, Jonas, come here and comb your hair," Mother instructed. She smoothed out our clothes, a wasted effort, and helped me twist my hair into a crown. Twisting it made it itch even more. "Remember, we must all stay together. Do not walk away or stray. Do you understand?" We nodded. Mother still clutched her coat tightly under her arm. "Where are we?" asked Jonas. "Will they give us a bucket of water?" "I don't know yet," said Mother, fixing her own hair. She pulled out a tube of lipstick and with a weak hand applied the melted color to her lips. Jonas smiled. She winked back at him. The NKVD had bayoneted rifles at the ready. The sun reflected off the dagger-shaped blades. They could puncture us within a fraction of a second. Miss Grebus and Mrs. Rimis helped the small children out first, and we followed. Andrus and the gray-haired gentleman carried the bald man from the car. We weren't at a train station. We were in a wide, deep valley surrounded by forested hills. I saw mountains in the distance. The sky had never looked so blue, so beautiful. I had to shade my eyes from the intense sun. I breathed deeply and felt the crisp, clean air draft my polluted lungs. The NKVD directed the deportees from each train car to sit in groups on the grass, 20 feet from the tracks. We were given 2 buckets of slop and water. The children lunged for it. It was the first time I had seen the other passengers. There were thousands of people. Did we look as pitiful as they did? Masses of Lithuanians with tattered suitcases and bulging bags poured out into the valley, dirty and gray with soiled clothing, as if they had lived in a gutter for years. Everyone moved in slow motion, some too weak to carry their belongings. I didn't have control of my legs, nor did most others. Many buckled under their own weight onto the ground. "We must stretch before sitting down, sweetheart," said Mother. "Our muscles have surely atrophied these past weeks." Jonas stretched. He looked like a filthy street beggar. His golden hair stuck to his head in matted clumps, and his lips were dry and cracked. He looked at me, his eyes widened. I could only imagine the state I was in. We sat down and the grass felt heavenly, like a featherbed compared with the wagon floor. The chugging motion of the train, however, was still trapped in my body. I looked at the people from our train car. They looked at me. Revealed by daylight, we saw the strangers we had shared a black closet with for 6 weeks. Ona was only a few years older than me. It had been dark when they put her on the truck in front of the hospital. Mrs. Arvidas was more attractive than her shadow. She had a very shapely figure, smooth brown hair and full lips. Mrs. Rimis was a short woman with thick ankles close to Mother's age. People tried to communicate with the other groups, looking for family members and loved ones. The man who wound his watch approached me.
"Do you have a handkerchief I could borrow?"
he asked. I nodded and quickly handed him the hanky neatly folded to conceal my writing.
"Thank you,"
he said, dabbing his nose. He turned his back to me and walked amongst the crowd of people. I watched as he shook hands with a man he obviously recognized, passing the fabric within palms. The man patted his brow with the handkerchief before putting it in his pocket. Pass it along, I thought, imagining the hanky traveling hand to hand until it reached Papa. "Elena, look," said Mrs. Rimis. "There are horse-drawn carts." Mother stood up and looked down the row of groups. "There are men with the NKVD. They're walking amongst the people." Andrus combed through his wavy hair with his fingers. He looked around constantly, watching the guards, yet keeping his head down. He had to be nervous. His face had healed but was still sallow with remnants of yellow bruises. Would they recognize him? Would they haul him away or kill him right in front of us? I moved near him, trying to position my body to conceal his. But he was taller, his shoulders wide. I looked at the sharp blades of the bayonets and felt my stomach pitch with fear. Ona began weeping loudly.
"Pipe down," ordered the bald man. "You'll draw attention to us."
"Please don't cry," said Andrus, shooting glances from Ona down to the guards. A group near the front of the train was herded into 2 horse-drawn wagons. They drove away. I watched as the NKVD walked with men from cluster to cluster. The men looked strange, certainly not Lithuanian or Russian. They had darker skin and black hair, and their general appearance was disheveled, primitive. They stopped at the group of people next to us and began talking with the NKVD. "Elena, what are they saying?" asked Mrs. Rimis. Mother didn't answer. "Elena, they're—" She stopped. "What?" said Mrs. Rimis. "They're selling us," she whispered. Chapter 23. I watched the men walking amongst the groups, surveying the merchandise. They made people stand, turn around, and show them their hands.
"Mother, why are they selling us?" asked Jonas. "Where are we going?"
"Elena," said Mrs. Arvidas, "you must tell them that Andres is a simpleton. Please. If not, they'll take him from me. Andres, put your head down."
"They're selling us in groups," reported Mother.
I looked around our cluster. We were mostly women and children, with only 2 old men. But we had Andres. Despite his injuries, he looked strong and able.
"Do we want to be bought?" asked Jonas.
No one answered. A guard approached with a man. They stopped in front of our group. Everyone looked down except me. I couldn't help myself. I stared at the guard, who appeared well-rested, clean, and fed. I saw Mother cough into her hand and discreetly try to wipe off her lipstick. The disheveled man pointed at her and said something to the guard. The guard shook his head and waved a circular motion around our group. The man pointed at Mother once again and then made an obscene gesture. The guard laughed and began muttering. The man surveyed our group and then he pointed at Andres. The guard walked over to Andres and barked a command. Andres did not move. My stomach braided up into my throat. "He's slow. Leave him alone," said Mrs. Arvidas. "Elena, tell them." Mother spoke one word in Russian. The guard grabbed Andres by the hair and raised his face. Andres stared blankly. Ona cried and rocked back and forth. Mr. Stallis moaned and grumbled. The man waved his hands in disgust at our group and walked away. Other groups were purchased, loaded into wagons and driven off through the valley to disappear through the V at the base of the hills. We finished the last drops of slop and water, debating whether we wanted to be bought. Someone mentioned escaping. Running away was briefly discussed until a gunshot rang out, followed by screams near the front of the train. The little girl with the dolly began to cry. "Elena," said Mrs. Rimis, "ask one of the guards where they're taking the people." Mother tried to speak with a guard, but he ignored her. For the moment, I didn't care what happened. The grass smelled like fresh chives and the sunshine filled me with strength. I stood up and stretched. The children spread out a bit and the guards didn't seem to care. The NKVD inspected the train cars, stopping only to scream that we were filthy pigs who disrespected the train. The engine hissed, readying for departure. "They're going back for more," said Andres.
"You think so?"
asked Jonas. "They won't stop," said Andres, "until they've gotten rid of all of us." Chapter 24. Hours passed and the sun began to sink. Only 2 groups remained. The grouchy woman stomped around and yelled at us. She said Mother made our group appear weak and that now they would probably shoot everyone. "Let them shoot us," said the bald man. "I'm telling you, we'd be better off." "But they were going to make us slaves," argued Mrs. Arvidas. "A little work wouldn't kill you," said the grouchy woman to Mrs. Arvidas. "They'll probably want some manual labor from us, that's all. That's why they took the other groups first, because most of you look so weak. I grew up on a farm. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty." "Then you're elected to go dig up some food," said Andres. "Now leave our mothers alone." Jonas and I were spread out on the grass, trying to stretch our stiff muscles. Andres joined us, put his hands behind his head, and stared up at the sky. "Your forehead is getting red," I told him. "A sunburn is the least of my worries," said Andres. "I'm not turning my back to the guards. Maybe if we get a bit of color, we'll be bought and hauled off into Soviet slavery like the witch wants," he said. Jonas rolled over onto his back like Andres.
"Just as long as we can stay together. Papa said that's important."
"I have no choice but to stay with my mother. I'm surprised she made it this far," said Andres, looking over in her direction. Mrs. Arvidas was swatting flies away with her silk handkerchief and losing her balance in the process.
She's not exactly hardy."
"Do you have any sisters or brothers?" asked Jonas.
"No," said Andrus. "My mother didn't enjoy being pregnant. My father said that since he had a son, he didn't need any more children."
"My papa said they're going to give us another brother or sister one day. I think I'd like a brother," said Jonas. "So what do you think everyone at home is doing? Do you think they wonder what happened to us?"
"If they do, they're too scared to ask about it," said Andrus.
"But why? And why were we sent away?" asked Jonas.
"Because we were on the list," I said.
"But why were we on the list?" continued Jonas.
"Because Papa works at the university," I replied.
"But Mrs. Raskunis works at the university, and she wasn't taken," said Jonas. Jonas was right. Mrs. Raskunis had peered out from behind her curtains as we were being hauled off in the night. I had seen her staring. Why wasn't her family taken? Why did they hide behind their curtains instead of trying to stop them from deporting us? Papa would never have done that.
"I can understand why the bald man is on the list," I said. "He's horrible." "He's awfully eager to die, isn't he?" said Andrus, staring up at the sky.
"You know what?" said Jonas. "Looking at the sky, it's like I'm lying on the grass at home in Lithuania."
That sounded like something Mother would say, throwing color onto a black and white picture.
"Look," continued Jonas. "That cloud looks like a cannon."
"Make it blow up the Soviets," I said, running my fingers over the blades of grass. "They deserve it." Andrus turned his head to me. I felt awkward under his prolonged gaze. "What?" I asked. "You always seem to have a mouthful of opinions," he said.
"That's what Papa said. See, Lina, you better be careful," said Jonas.
My bedroom door swung open. "Lina, I want to see you in the living room," said Papa.
"Why?" I asked.
"In the living room, now!" Papa's nostrils flared. He walked out of the room.
"Mother, what's wrong?" "You heard your father, Lina. Go to the living room."
We walked out into the hallway. "Go to sleep, Jonas," said Mother, without even looking in the direction of my brother's room. I looked over. Jonas was peeking out his bedroom door, his eyes wide. Papa was steaming mad, and he was mad at me. What had I done? I walked into the living room. "Is this what you waste your talent on?" He thrust a scrap of paper in my face.
"Papa, it was a joke," I explained.
"You think it's a joke. What if the Kremlin doesn't think it's a joke? They're perfect likenesses, for God's sake." He dropped the paper into my lap. I looked at my sketch. The likeness was perfect. Even in a clown suit, it was obviously Stalin. I drew him standing in our dining room, with Papa and his friends sitting around the table, launching paper airplanes at him. The men were laughing. Stalin had a sad clown face as airplanes hit his head. Papa and Dr. Seltzer were perfect likenesses. I hadn't quite mastered the journalist's chin yet. "Are there others?" my father demanded, snapping the paper from me.
"It was for fun,"
said a small voice. Jonas stood in his pajamas in the hallway.
"Please don't be mad, Papa."
"Were you in on this too?" yelled my father.
"Oh, Jonas," said Mother.
"He wasn't in on it. I drew it myself. I showed it to him because I thought it was funny." "Have you shown this to anyone else?" asked Papa.
"No, I just drew it this afternoon," I said.
"Lina," said Mother, "this is serious. The Soviets could arrest you if they saw your drawing."
"But how would they ever see it? I threw it away," I argued.
"What if someone found it in the trash like I did? A wind could have blown this to the foot of Stalin," said Papa. "You've drawn your father and his friends mocking the leader of the Soviet Union. Are there others?" he asked. "No, that's the only one." Papa tore up my drawing and threw the pieces into the fire.
Andrus continued to stare at me. "Is that what you want?" he finally asked. "To blow up the Soviets?" I turned to look at him. "I just want to go home. I want to see my father," I said. He nodded. Chapter 25. Evening came, and 2 groups were left. Most of the NKVD had departed with the train. Only 5 armed officers remained with 2 trucks. Nearly 75 Lithuanians and only 5 Soviets, yet no one dared move. I think most of us were too tired and weak. The grass was a welcomed bed, the space a luxury. I made note of landmarks to draw for Papa. The NKVD made a fire and cooked their dinner while we sat and stared. They had American canned goods, bread, and coffee. After dinner, they drank vodka and smoked, the volume of their voices rising steadily. "What are they saying?" I asked Mother. "They're talking about their homes, where they're from. They're sharing stories of their friends and family," she said. I didn't believe her. I listened to the Russian words. The tone of their voices and the cackling laughter didn't sound like talk of family. Ona began again. She had taken to chanting, "No, no, no," over and over. One of the NKVD stood up and yelled, flipping his hand at our group. "I better try to quiet her," said Mother, getting up, "before the guards become angry." Jonas was already asleep. I covered him with my blue raincoat and wiped his hair away from his eyes. The bald man snored. The gray-haired man wound his watch. Andrus sat at the edge of the group, one knee pulled to his chest, watching the guards. He had a strong profile, an angular jaw. A piece of his disheveled hair fell perfectly against the side of his face. I'd need a soft pencil to draw it. He saw me staring. I turned away quickly. "Hey," he whispered to me. I looked up. Something rolled across the grass and hit my leg. It was the stone with the sparkles he had found that day when he jumped off the train. "The crown jewel from the train car princess," I whispered, smiling. He nodded with a laugh. I picked it up to roll back to him. "No, you keep it," said Andrus. We woke at sunrise. A few hours later, a wagon came, chose the other group and took them away. The guards then loaded us into the back of 2 trucks and drove us across the valley beyond the notch in the hills where a road began. No one spoke. We were too frightened to discuss our possible destination. Riding in the truck, I realized that trying to escape would have been ridiculous. There was nothing for miles. We didn't see a human being or pass another vehicle. I thought about the man who had my handkerchief, hoping it was passed along, moving closer to Papa. After 2 hours, we saw huts dotting the sides of the road. We entered what appeared to be an inhabited area, and the truck pulled over in front of a wooden building. The guards jumped out yelling, "Davai! Davai!" and other instructions. "They say we should leave our luggage in the trucks," said Mother, clutching her coat tightly over her arm. "I want to know where we're going before we get out," demanded Mrs. Arvidas. Mother tried to talk to the guards. She turned and smiled. "It's a bathhouse." We jumped off the truck. Mother folded her coat and put it in her suitcase. The guards split us into male and female groups. "Boys, carry me," the bald man said to Andrus and Jonas. "You have to bathe me." Jonas looked petrified, Andrus disgusted. I smiled, which seemed to annoy Andrus even more. The men went first. The guards called them up onto the porch and began yelling in their faces, pushing them. Jonas looked at Mother for translation. "Take off your clothes, dear," Mother translated. "Now? Right here?" Jonas asked, looking at all the women and girls. "We'll turn around, won't we, ladies?" said Mother. We all turned our backs to the porch. "No use in being modest now," said Mr. Stallis. "We're nothing but skeletons. Now take off my pants, boy. Ow! Watch my leg!" I heard Mr. Stallis complaining and Jonas apologizing. A belt buckle knocked against the wood of the porch. I wondered if it was Andrus's. The guards yelled. "He says you must leave your clothes there, that they will be deloused," Mother translated. Something smelled funny. I couldn't tell if it came from our group of women or from the bathhouse. We heard the bald man yell from within the structure. Mother turned around and clasped her hands together. "My sweet Jonas," she whispered. Chapter 26. We waited. "What's going on in there?" I said. Mother shook her head. 3 NKVD stood on the porch. One barked yet another command. 10 of us at a time," said Mother. "We must go to the porch and take off our clothes." We were in the first group, along with Mrs. Arvidus, the grouchy woman, and her daughters. Mother helped Ona up onto the porch. I unbuttoned my dress and pulled it over my head, unbraided my hair and took off my sandals. Mother stood in her brassiere and underwear, helping Ona. The guards stood on the porch, staring at us. I hesitated. "It's okay, dear," said Mother. "Think of how nice it will be to feel clean again." Ona began to whimper. A young blonde guard lit a cigarette, turned his back, and looked off toward the truck. Another NKVD stared, grinning and biting his bottom lip. I took off my bra and panties and stood on the porch, covering myself with my hands. Mrs. Arvidus stood next to me, her voluptuous breasts too large to conceal with her thin forearm. A guard with a gold tooth who appeared to be a commander walked down the porch, stopping to look at each woman, scanning her up and down. He stopped at Mrs. Arvidus. She did not lift her head. He swirled a toothpick on his tongue and raised his brow, violating her with his stare. I let out a breath in disgust. Mother's head snapped to me. The guard grabbed my arms and threw them down to my sides. He looked me up and down and grinned. He reached out and groped my breast. I felt his ragged fingernails scratch across my skin. I had never been naked in front of a man before. His touch, the rough hand on me, made me feel sick and dirtier on the inside than I was on the outside. I tried to cross my arms. Mother yelled something in Russian and pulled me behind Ona. Ona's inner thighs and buttocks were caked with chunks of dried blood. The guard began to scream at Mother. She removed her remaining clothing and put her arm around me. They marched us into the bathhouse. Chapter 27. A guard stood at a distance. He plunged a scoop in a bucket and threw some sort of white powder at us. The showers clicked on with an icy spray. "We must hurry," said Mother. "We don't know how long they'll give us." She took a small chunk of soap and scrubbed at my scalp and face, ignoring her own body. I watched the brown rivers of dirt run down my legs, over my ankles, and into the drain. I wanted to be sucked down with it, away from the guards and the humiliation. "Keep scrubbing, Lina, quickly," said Mother, turning to wash Ona. I stood shivering under the stream of water, washing as well as I could, hoping the guards would not be waiting for us on the other side of the wall. I washed Mother's back and tried to wash her hair. Mrs. Arvidus stood under the stream of water, her hands raised above her head gracefully, unaware, as if she were in her own private bath at home. The showers snapped off. We retrieved our clothes on the other side of the wall. I quickly pulled my dress over my head and felt a knock against my thigh. The stone from Andrus. I put my hand in my pocket, my fingers searching for the smooth edge. Mother combed through my hair with her fingers. I looked at her wet face. Water dripped from her blonde waves onto her shoulders. "I want to go home," I whispered, shivering. "Please." She dropped her clothing and hugged me, long and hard. "We'll go home. Keep thinking of your father and of our house. We must keep it alive in our hearts." She let go and looked at me. If we do, we'll get there. The men were already in the first truck. Another group of women and children stood naked on the porch as we exited. "Feel better, darling?" said Mother, smiling at Jonas as she climbed into the truck. She checked her suitcase for her coat. Jonas looked much improved in appearance and disposition. So did Andrus. His wet hair was shiny, the color of dark cinnamon.
"Now we're clean dead men. So what of that?" said the bald man. "If we were dead men, they wouldn't allow us to shower," said the gray-haired man, looking at his watch.
"Hey, there was blonde hair under all that dirt," said Andrus, reaching out and grabbing a strand of my hair. I shrank back and looked away. Mother put her arm around me. "What's wrong, Lena?" asked Jonas. I ignored him. I thought of the guard who touched me and all the things I should have done. Slapped him, kicked him, screamed in his face. I put my hand in my pocket and grabbed the stone from Andrus. I squeezed it and tried as hard as I could to break it. "Do you suppose they'll take us for a 4-course meal now that we've been to the sauna?" joked Mrs. Rimis.
"Oh, yes, a piece of Black Forest torte and a cognac or two," laughed Mrs. Arvidis.
"I'd love a nice hot coffee," said Mother.
"Strong coffee," added the bald man.
"Wow, I never thought it could feel so good to be clean," exclaimed Jonas, looking at his hands. Everyone's humor was much improved, except Ona's. She continued chanting. Despite the efforts of Mrs. Rimis, she could not be calmed. As the last group of women and children boarded the truck, the commander saw Ona standing up, sitting down, and pulling her hair. He yelled at her. The young blonde guard appeared at the back of the truck. "Leave her be," said Mrs. Rimis. "The poor dear is grieving." Mother translated to the commander. Ona stood up and stamped her right foot. The commander stepped up and pulled Ona from the truck. She lost all control, screaming, clawing at him. She was no match for his height or strength. He threw her to the ground. His eyes narrowed and his square jaw tightened. Mother scrambled to jump off the truck to Ona. It was too late. The commander pulled out a pistol and shot Ona in the head. I gasped, along with everyone else. Andrus grabbed Jonas's face and covered his eyes. Blood, the color of thick red wine, pooled under Ona's head. Her legs splayed out in an unnatural bent angle. One of her feet was missing a shoe. "Lena," said Andrus. I turned my head to him, dazed. "Don't look," he said. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I turned my head back. The young blonde guard was staring at Ona's body. "Lena, look at me," urged Andrus. Mother slumped on her knees near the edge of the truck, looking down at Ona. I moved and sat down near my brother. The engine rumbled and the truck began to roll. Mother sat down and put her face in her hands. Miss Grebus clucked her tongue, shaking her head. Jonas pulled my head against his knees and patted my hair. "Please, don't say anything to the guards. Don't make them mad, Lena," he whispered. Ona's body got smaller and smaller as we drove away. She lay dead in the dirt, murdered by the NKVD. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, her daughter decomposed in the grass. How would her family ever know what happened to her? How would anyone know what was happening to us? I would continue to write and draw whenever I had the chance. I would draw the commander firing, Mother on her knees with her head in her hands, and our truck driving away, the tires spitting gravel onto Ona's dead body. Chapter 28. We drove into a large collective farming area. Clusters of decrepit one-room cabins formed a shanty village. The warm sun was clearly temporary. Buildings pitched at a slant, their warped roofs warning of extreme weather. The guards ordered us off the truck. Andrus hung his head, standing close to his mother. They began directing us to what I thought were our own shacks. But when Miss Grebus and Mrs. Remus entered one, a woman ran out and began arguing with the guards.
"There are people living in the cabins," whispered Jonas.
"Yes, we'll most likely have to share," said Mother, pulling us close. 2 women walked past us carrying large buckets of water. I didn't recognize them from our train. We were assigned to a dingy hut near the back of the settlement. The gray wood was bald, shaved by many seasons of wind and snow. The door had splits and cracks and sat crooked on the frame. A strong wind could whisk the shack up into the sky, scattering it in a burst of pieces. The blonde guard pulled the door open, bellowed something in Russian, and pushed us inside. A squat Altean woman, wrapped in layers, ran to the door and began screaming after the guard. Mother moved us to the corner. The woman turned and began yelling at us. Her hair poked out of her kerchief like black straw. Wrinkles formed an atlas on her wide, weathered face.
"What's she saying?"
asked Jonas. "She says she has no room for filthy criminals," says Mother.
"We're not criminals,"
I said. The woman continued her rant, throwing her arms in the air and spitting on the floor of the hut.
"Is she crazy?"
asked Jonas. "She says she barely has food enough for herself and she's not about to share it with criminals like us." Mother turned her back to the woman. "Well now, we'll just set our things in the corner. Jonas, put your suitcase down." The woman grabbed my hair and pulled it, yanking me toward the door to throw me out. Mother yelled, blasting the woman in Russian. She ripped the woman's hand from my head, slapped her, and pushed her away. Jonas kicked her in the shin. The Altean woman stared at us with angled black eyes. Mother returned the stare. The woman let out a hearty laugh. She asked a question. "We're Lithuanian," said Mother, first speaking in Lithuanian and then in Russian. The woman gibbered. "What's she saying?" I asked. "She says feisty people make good workers and that we have to pay her rent." Mother continued asking questions. "Pay her? For what? To live in this hole in the middle of nowhere?" I said. "We're in Altai," said Mother. "They are farming potatoes and beets."
"So there are potatoes to eat?"
asked Jonas. "Food is rationed. She said the guards oversee the farm and the workers," said Mother. I remembered Papa talking about Stalin confiscating peasants' land, tools, and animals. He told them what crops they would produce and how much they would be paid. I thought it was ridiculous. How could Stalin simply take something that didn't belong to him? Something that a farmer and his family had worked their whole lives for? "That's communism, Lina," Papa had said. The woman yelled at Mother, wagging her finger and shaking her head. She left the hut. We were on a kolkhoz, a collective farm, and I was to become a beet farmer. I hated beets.